Hey guys, so today we'll learn how to name binary covalent compounds. So what are binary covalent compounds to even begin with? Binary covalent compounds consist of two different non-metals. So binary corresponds to the two, and we know that covalent compounds are non-metals, and these non-metals are in fact sharing electrons. But let's just learn the process of naming all of these covalent compounds. We'll start off with some simple rules. So here's your first step. Your first step is identifying the two elements in the compound and also their quantity. So we notice that C right here in carbon dioxide, that stands for carbon. And we notice that there's a 2 after O2. And if we know O is an oxygen, then we clearly have a carbon and an oxygen. And we also know there's a 2, and all these numbers today will be known as a subscript. A subscript basically means that they are like the bottom right small number at the corner that represents how many there are within that one singular molecule. So we have carbon and oxygen. Right here, we have nitrogen and oxygen. Now we have hydrogen and oxygen. And we have silicon and chlorine. So for you first need to name and identify these elements and how much there are. So we notice there's 2, there's 5, there's 2, and there's 4. Now we use prefixes to show the number of elements for each element. And here are all the prefixes. In fact, these are Greek prefixes from 1 to 10. So let's try to tackle carbon dioxide first, knowing this already. So the first element we know is carbon. And since there's only one carbon atom, we would not use the prefix mono. Mono is only used for the second element. The second element is oxygen. And since there's two atoms of oxygen, we use the prefix di. And once you combine them together, you get carbon dioxide. You always add IDE to the second element's name. Now let's name N2O5. The first element we know is nitrogen. So let's just write that down. We know that is nitrogen. Since there are two nitrogen atoms of this subscript, we obviously have to add a di now. Now, this is known as dinitrogen. Now, you have to look at the second element. And we notice that the second element is oxygen, with 5 oxygen atoms. So therefore, the prefix must be penta, because penta is correlated to 5. So now we have penta oxygen. But that's not right, because now you have to add an "ide," which is the suffix "ide" to fix this. So then I now remove this and then place this with an "ide" now. So now you're left with dinitrogen pentaoxide. Now let's move on to water, commonly known as H2O. The first element we know is hydrogen. But since there's two hydrogen atoms, we would have to change this to dihydrogen. And now let's look at the second element. So the second element is oxygen. And since we use mono for only for the second element, and since there's no subscript for this, we could immediately assume there's one oxygen, meaning that this is going to be mono oxygen. But however, we know that this is not right because now we have to add an IDE. So now we put dihydrogen monoxide. And let's look at the final one. You can pause the video and do this by yourself to see if you understand the material. So take your time for that. But if not, let's just start tackling this question. So now we need to identify the first two elements. You have silicon and chlorine. So Si stands for silicon. So if we know the first element is silicon, there's only one silicon atom. So we don't need to put mono for this one, since mono is only used for second elements. So all we need to do is just put silicon. Now we have to identify the second element. And the second element is chlorine. with 4 atoms. So now you have to use tetra. But we know this is not right. So we need to add the IDE. So we remove this until it's still called tetrachloride. So what we learned today is that first you need to identify the elements. Second, you need to identify the quantity. Then you place all of these prefixes, except for mono for the first element. And finally, everything ends with "ide" for binary covalent compounds. And that's it. Follow these steps to name any binary covalent compound, but just remember to use prefixes for both elements. Skip mono for the first element if it only has one atom. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe.